What would you do if a flight attendant accused you of faking your first-class ticket right in front of a plane full of strangers? And what if you actually own part of the airline? This isn't just a story about a misunderstanding. It's about quiet power, public humiliation, and the moment one man turned it all around without saying a single harsh word. Before we dive in, let us know, what time are you listening to this, and where are you? Drop a comment below. We'd love to hear from you. The morning sun was spilling through the tall glass windows of Terminal 4 at LAX, casting long slivers of light across the polished tile floor. People moved with the slow, relaxed rhythm of a weekday flight, not rushed, not dragging, just moving. Orlis Air's gate for first-class passengers felt almost like a private lounge. Polished brass accents, soft lighting, and the hum of gentle conversations. Ellison Braxley adjusted the cuff of his shirt as he stepped into the line with his wife. He wasn't flashy, that was never his way, but the quiet strength in his posture, the slow, steady way he moved, it had a weight to it. Beside him, Marvine walked with the kind of grace that said she knew her place in the world, even if the world had tried to make her forget it. She reached out and looped her fingers gently around his arm. "Still not telling them who you are?" she asked softly, glancing up at him with that knowing half-smile she'd worn for most of their 34 years together. Ellison smiled back. "Nope, not unless I have to." The gate agent scanned their boarding passes without issue, offered a polite nod, and motioned them through. No fanfare, no special treatment. Just the way Ellison liked it. As they stepped into the jet bridge, Marvine leaned closer. "You do realize one of these days someone's going to push the wrong button?" "Maybe," Ellison said, calm as ever, "but not today." The cabin of Aurelus Air's first-class section was stunning, even to them. Leather seats the color of warm coffee, wood veneered tables polished so fine they reflected light like water, a low murmur of voices, the rustle of newspapers and phone screens. They walked down the short aisle, passing by passengers already settled into their spots. A few looked up, a flicker of curiosity in their eyes. Ellison was used to that. The scan, the silent question. Do they belong here? Seat 3A and 3B, window and aisle. They set their small bags down, moving with quiet efficiency. That's when she appeared. Candace Holway, the head flight attendant, moved like she had something to prove. Her blonde hair was pulled into a tight bun, and her expression was firm, unreadable. She noticed them, and something in her eyes shifted. Not surprise exactly, more like calculation. "Good morning," Marvine said pleasantly. "Could you confirm, is this seat 3A? Candace didn't smile. "If that's what your ticket says." The words hung in the air, clipped and cold. Not aggressive, but not welcoming either. Ellison straightened slightly, watching her without speaking. Marvine gave a polite nod and turned toward her seat. But something in her jaw had set. She felt it too. A few minutes passed. Passengers continued boarding. The quiet hum of pre-flight preparation filled the space. Candace moved up and down the aisle, checking compartments, making eye contact with the crew. But her eyes kept drifting back toward them. Ellison leaned toward Marvine. "Something tells me this isn't over," he said under his breath. She didn't answer, just took his hand gently. Candace returned. Her voice was calm, but her stance was stiffer now. "I'm going to need to verify your tickets again," she said, eyes fixed on Ellison. Marvine blinked. "I showed them at the gate. Is there a problem?" Candace didn't blink. "Just a standard procedure. Sometimes there are mix-ups." Ellison pulled the neatly folded paper from his inner jacket pocket and handed it over. Candace glanced at it, too quickly to really read it, then looked back at them. "These were printed online?" "Yes," Ellison replied. "Directly from our Aurelus account." "I'll need to check something. Please remain seated," she said curtly, then turned and walked briskly toward the front. Ellison exhaled through his nose. Not angry. Not yet. Marvine leaned in. "That was fast." "Mm-hmm." Across the aisle, a middle-aged man in a navy suit glanced over, watching with raised brows. He didn't say anything, just noted it. Another passenger across the cabin had subtly lowered her newspaper. Ellison felt the shift. He'd felt it before. Not the kind that came from raised voices or blatant insults, but the quieter kind, the more dangerous kind, the kind that dressed itself in protocol and smiled through policy. He didn't flinch, didn't make a scene, but in his mind, something had clicked into place. He looked at his wife, who had turned to gaze out the window. She already decided we didn't belong, Marvin murmured, so quiet only he could hear, before she even saw the ticket. Ellison gave a slow nod. She did. And somewhere inside that patient, measured part of him, the one that had learned to stay quiet, stay still, had just begun to stand up. The silence that followed Candace's retreat wasn't just quiet. It was thick. The kind of silence that fills a room after something off has been said, but no one wants to be the first to say it out loud. Marvin didn't speak. She reached down to straighten her seatbelt, her fingers slow and careful, but Ellison saw the tension in her knuckles. She didn't look at him, just stared out the window, eyes tracking the movement of another plane crawling across the tarmac. Ellison leaned back in his seat, shoulders square, gaze steady. Inside, though, something was simmering. He wasn't new to this. Neither of them were. 34 years of being judged, questioned, dismissed, smiled at too little or too much. They'd survived it all. But every time it happened, it was like a pebble tossed in the well of his patience. The surface would settle, but the ripple always came first. And right now that ripple was wide. She didn't even read it, Marvin finally said, her voice soft and even. The ticket. She looked at it for maybe half a second. Ellison nodded slowly. She already made up her mind. Across the aisle, a man in a gray sport coat shifted in his seat. He wasn't staring exactly, but his head had turned just enough. One row ahead, a woman with red glasses lowered her phone and pretended to scroll while watching them from the corner of her eye. Ellison saw it. He saw all of it. He wasn't angry, not in the yelling, fist-shaking kind of way. No, his anger came differently. It came as clarity, like a slow tightening in the chest that told him something had crossed a line. Marvin turned toward him. You okay? I'm thinking, he said. She smiled, just barely. That's never good for them. Before he could answer, Candace returned, now with a clipboard in one hand and a wireless radio in the other. Her walk was faster this time. Her heels tapped sharp on the carpet as she stopped beside them. I've escalated the matter to airport security, she said, not bothering to lower her voice. They'll be boarding in just a few minutes to sort this out. Ellison didn't respond. He didn't blink. He just looked at her, eyes steady, not confrontational, but unmoving. The kind of look that made people think twice without knowing why. Marvin, however, blinked. Once. Then said calmly, Sort what out? I have a duty, Candace replied. There are protocols. Discrepancies with ticket data have to be investigated before takeoff. It's nothing personal. Marvin's voice didn't rise, but there was a firmness in it now. It feels personal. Candace didn't answer. She turned on her heel and walked back toward the front of the cabin. Ellison watched her go, then pulled his phone from his inside pocket. He scrolled through a few contacts, paused, then put the phone down on his tray table without making a call. Not yet. Behind them, a soft voice spoke. She's wrong, said the young flight attendant who had been standing a few rows back. Her name tag read Laura. She looked nervous, eyes darting toward where Candace had gone. I saw you check in. I saw your tickets. There was nothing wrong with them. Ellison turned slightly, meeting her eyes. What's your name? Laura, she said, fidgeting with the hem of her uniform. I'm just new. Only been flying 3 months. Marvin gave her a small nod. You're brave to speak up. Thank you, Laura looked down. She said it wasn't my place. Ellison smiled faintly. Sometimes the right thing isn't your place until you make it so. She gave a short nod and stepped back as Candace reappeared, speaking into her headset. Yes, gate 14B, first-class cabin. Security requested. Suspected fraudulent boarding. Ellison's hand moved slowly to pick up his phone again. This time he unlocked it and tapped a name. What are you doing? Marvin asked gently. Calling someone who still knows who I am, he said. He stood up, walked toward the front galley where there was a little more space, and put the phone to his ear. Connect me to Vernon Eldon, he said once the call picked up. Office of Strategic Relations. Tell him it's Ellison Braxley calling. Then he stepped aside, leaned one shoulder lightly against the wall, and waited. Back at their seats, Marvine sat with her hands folded in her lap. She wasn't scared, not exactly, but there was a weight in her chest, a familiar ache she thought she'd outgrown. She wasn't thinking about being embarrassed or even being asked to leave. She was thinking about how many times she'd watched people like Candace speak like they had all the authority, while people like her husband had to explain themselves, prove themselves, shrink themselves just to move through the world peacefully. The ripple had returned, and this time she wasn't sure it would settle. It didn't take long. Maybe 3 minutes, tops, before two uniformed officers stepped onto the plane. The moment they appeared at the front, the already tense cabin went quiet. One of them had a notepad in hand, the other rested a hand near his belt. Not threatening, but alert. Candace stood tall and walked up to greet them, like she'd been waiting all day for this moment. "Gentlemen," she said with clipped efficiency, "the two passengers in seats 3A and 3B, there's a potential issue with their boarding credentials. I'd like the matter handled before we depart." One of the officers tilted his head, skeptical. The other made eye contact with Ellison, who had just ended his call and was walking calmly back to his seat. "Sir," the first officer said, stepping into the aisle, "we've been told there may be an issue with your ticket." Ellison looked at him, then at the passengers now watching, some with concern, some with unease, and a few with that quiet, sidelong interest reserved for the start of a scandal. "My ticket was scanned at the gate," Ellison said. "No issue was raised. I've shown it again to this flight attendant, but she refused to verify it properly. Instead, she called you." The officer flipped open his pad. "May I see your ID?" Ellison handed over his wallet. No rush, no visible frustration, just deliberate calm. Behind him, Marvine sat frozen, not afraid for their safety. She knew better. But the humiliation of it, that was its own kind of wound. To be accused without cause. To have eyes on you, not because you're a person, but because you're a question mark. She felt her cheeks flush. Candace crossed her arms. "This isn't about race," she said quickly, as if reading the room. "I've had to question white passengers before. This is just policy." Ellison didn't look at her. He kept his eyes on the officer, who handed the wallet back and gave a quick nod. "Everything checks out," he said. "We'll notify the gate desk to confirm again, but from what I see, there's no problem." Candace's voice tightened. "I'd still prefer they be removed until it's fully cleared." That did it. Ellison stepped forward. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't even sound angry. But there was something unmistakable in the tone. A shift. "You called the police on a man with a verified ticket," he said. "You stood here and questioned us publicly, without even checking properly. You're not following policy, you're following a pattern." The word hung in the air like smoke. Pattern. There was a stillness after that, the kind that doesn't ask for attention. It demands it. From 2 rows back, the woman in the red glasses lowered her phone. "This is ridiculous," she said just loud enough. "They didn't do anything." Another man leaned into the aisle. "I saw them come in. Their tickets were scanned like everyone else's." Candace's eyes flicked toward the voices. She seemed caught between holding the line and realizing it was starting to crumble under her feet. A voice crackled over her earpiece. She pressed it, listened, then nodded once. Her jaw tightened. "Fine," she said, turning back to the front. The officers exchanged a glance and stepped aside. Ellison sat back down beside his wife. Marvine took his hand. She didn't speak, but her grip said everything. Across the aisle, the man in the gray jacket gave Ellison a small nod of solidarity. It wasn't much, but it was something. One of the younger flight attendants, Laura, approached a few moments later, quietly placing 2 fresh bottles of water on their tray tables. "I'm sorry," she said, barely audible. "That shouldn't have happened." Ellison looked at her. His expression softened. "I know," he said, "but it did. What matters now is what comes next." Marvine finally spoke, her voice calm but carrying weight. "Do you ever get used to it?" she asked, looking at her husband. "No," he said, turning to her. "But I've learned how to wait long enough for the system to show itself. That's when it's time to move." He reached for his phone again. Not to make a scene, not for revenge, but because things don't change by staying silent. He had always believed that power wasn't just about speaking loudly. Sometimes it was about speaking last. And now it was his turn. The cabin had started to breathe again, but not deeply. There was still something hanging in the air, like the scent of something burned and forgotten to be cleaned. People weren't talking much, just small glances, quiet sips of water, and half-hearted attempts to look away. Ellison sat with his phone in his hand, thumb hovering over the call history. He hadn't said anything more since the officers left. He didn't need to. That wasn't the moment for loud declarations or anger. He knew that. But he also knew something else. It wasn't over. Marvine sat beside him, her posture straight, her hands folded neatly on her lap. Her silence wasn't passive. It was intentional. There were years behind it, years of swallowing moments like this and pretending they didn't bother her. But they did, every time. "Who did you call?" she asked gently, not turning her head. "Vernon," Ellison said. "He's in Atlanta." Marvine nodded slowly. "You think he'll answer on a Saturday?" "He did," Ellison replied. "He'll call back." That was all he needed to say, because if Vernon Eldon had picked up, the message had already been delivered. Vernon didn't work at the gate or in operations. He was in corporate strategy. His phone didn't ring unless something serious had made its way to the top. Ellison slipped the phone back into his pocket and rested his hand on the armrest. The buzz in his chest had faded, but something more focused had taken its place. Resolve. Up front, Candace stood talking to a fellow crew member. Her tone wasn't as sure now. A few words floated back toward the cabin. "Was just trying to follow protocol. I've done this before." Laura, the young flight attendant, hovered near the front galley. Her fingers twisted nervously at the edge of her tablet. She kept glancing back at Ellison and Marvine, like she was trying to gather the nerve to say something else. Marvine finally turned her head and looked at her husband. "You know," she said quietly, "the part that hurts isn't that she doubted us. It's that she was so sure she was right, even when she had no proof." Ellison gave a slow nod. "It's what makes people dangerous. Not doubt, but certainty without evidence." Marvine let out a long breath, then leaned her head back against the seat. Laura took a tentative step toward them. I just wanted to say again, I'm sorry. I know I already did, but..." Ellison held up his hand gently, stopping her. "You don't have to keep apologizing," he said, "but you do have to decide who you want to be in the middle of moments like this." Laura looked down, chewing the inside of her cheek. "I didn't know what to do." "I get that," Marvine said, "but next time ask yourself who you're protecting. Sometimes silence is its own kind of choice." There was no judgment in her voice, just the weary wisdom of someone who had been there too many times. Laura nodded. "Thank you," she said and stepped back. Then it happened. A man in a Navy blazer, likely from ground operations, boarded the plane and walked straight to Candace. He held a phone in his hand, clearly not his, and whispered something urgently in her ear. Candace stiffened. Her back straightened and her mouth moved slowly. "You're sure?" she whispered. The man nodded. "It's direct. From the Atlanta office." Candace swallowed hard and took the phone. She stepped away from the galley, pressing it to her ear. Her voice was just barely audible, but those closest heard her say, "This is Candace Holway." Then there was a pause. Her face changed. It was subtle, but unmistakable. The kind of change that happens when someone realizes they've been standing on the wrong side of something very, very big. She hung up without another word, handed the phone back, and stood there for a beat too long. Marvine turned toward Ellison. "Was that your call coming back?" she asked. Ellison didn't answer right away. He just watched Candace as she turned and walked briskly down the aisle. Not with the same confidence as before, but with a different kind of urgency. She passed by them without a glance, disappeared into the back cabin, and didn't return. "I think the system just blinked," Ellison said quietly. From behind, a young man seated with headphones on had started recording again. He wasn't aiming to cause trouble. He just knew he'd witnessed something that wasn't supposed to happen. One small ripple had started to spread, and Ellison knew it was only just beginning. 7 minutes. That's how long it took for everything to shift. The cabin was still in that strange space between alert and waiting, passengers glancing toward the front. unsure if the flight was going to proceed or if another scene was about to unfold. Flight crews moved more quietly now, with a caution that hadn't been there earlier. Ellison didn't move much. He sat like someone who'd been in this moment before, only this time he held a piece of the lever. Then the intercom buzzed. A calm, composed voice echoed through the cabin. It wasn't the pilot. It wasn't a flight attendant either. It was someone from the ground team. Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the delay. There has been a staffing adjustment. Your new lead flight attendant will be boarding shortly. Thank you for your patience. Marvine blinked, then slowly turned toward her husband. Staffing adjustment, she said, the words slow and cautious. Ellison nodded once, almost imperceptibly. Candace was gone. A few seconds later, a different flight attendant, older, composed, walked onto the plane. She spoke to the co-pilot briefly, then made her way down the aisle. She didn't smile, but there was warmth in her eyes when she paused near Ellison and Marvine. Good afternoon, she said. Just wanted to let you know we're all set to depart shortly. I'm here if you need anything. Her tone was different, not overly friendly, not patronizing, just human. Marvine's response was quiet. Thank you. The attendant moved on. Across the cabin, quiet murmurs started again. Passengers leaned toward one another, whispering fragments. Did you see what happened? Was she fired? While others simply watched Ellison in a new light. They no longer saw a quiet man in a dark jacket. They were beginning to understand he wasn't just a passenger. Laura came over again, this time looking pale but resolute. She's gone, she said in a whisper. I don't know what exactly happened, but I heard someone say Atlanta called. Direct line. That doesn't happen. Ellison met her eyes. It does when it needs to. She swallowed. Are you someone important at Oralis? Ellison didn't smile, didn't boast. He just answered plainly. I hold enough shares to request immediate personnel decisions and trigger a training audit. Laura stared at him. I had no idea. I prefer it that way, he said, most of the time. He let that hang in the air for a moment, then added, but when people cross a line and make others feel smaller just because they can, I stop staying quiet. She nodded slowly. Are you going to make her lose her job? Marvine answered before Ellison could. She already did that to herself, she said gently. He's not here for revenge. Laura's eyes darted toward the front of the cabin. Some of the crew didn't agree with her, but nobody said anything. We were afraid. Ellison folded his hands. Then don't stay afraid forever. Use this moment. Silence passed between them. Then Laura said, I will. She stepped back, shoulders straighter now than when she'd arrived. The plane began taxiing. The cabin lights dimmed slightly, and the rumble beneath their feet grew steady. But the energy in the room had shifted again. The passengers looked less like an audience and more like participants in something they didn't expect to witness. A man had stood his ground, but not with shouting, not with threats, with a phone call, with presence, with a silence that forced others to listen. Marvine looked out the window, the sun catching the side of her face. Then she spoke, not looking at her husband. You didn't need to raise your voice, she said softly. I never do, Ellison replied. But somehow, she said, they finally heard you. He turned his head just slightly and looked at her. There was something behind his eyes now. Not anger, not satisfaction, just a quiet ache that had been there a long time, finally shifting its weight. I wasn't just speaking for us, he said. I was speaking for everyone who's been told without words that they don't belong. It gets heavy carrying that around. Marvine reached over and rested her hand on his. Let's put some of it down, she said. Right here, right now. He nodded once. The plane lifted into the sky. The plane was cruising steady now, somewhere high above Arizona. Outside, clouds drifted like soft islands, untouched by the tension that had passed below. But inside Ellison's mind, things were still moving, quicker than the plane, sharper than the air. He sat in silence, his laptop open in front of him, but untouched. A blank document glowed on the screen. Next to him, Marvine sipped ginger tea the new attendant had offered. Her shoulders had relaxed a little, but her fingers still tapped the armrest in a slow, rhythmic pattern. It wasn't anxiety, it was memory, residue. You know what you're going to do yet? She asked, setting her cup down. Ellison didn't answer right away. He was thinking through layers, not just about Candace, but the system that had made her feel comfortable doing what she did. He knew how that worked, how culture hid inside policy, how bias dressed itself in the language of procedure. Yeah, he finally said, but not just about her. He pulled the laptop closer and began typing. One short paragraph, then another. Each sentence more like a strike than a line. Not out of anger, but clarity. I'm requesting a full audit of employee training across Oralis, he said, half to himself, half to Marvine. Bias identification, behavioral assessment, customer engagement models, everything. And not the surface level stuff. Deep structure. Marvine watched him, then gave a slow nod. That's more than just cleaning up a mess. That's the point, he replied. His phone buzzed lightly. A message from Vernon. Board has reviewed the incident. Waiting on your directive. Let us know how far you want to take this. Ellison didn't smile, didn't frown, just stared at the message like it was a familiar road sign on a highway he'd driven too many times. I'm not looking to ruin anybody, he said quietly. But if we don't fix what allowed this, then it's not her fault alone. It's ours. Marvine tilted her head. You think they'll listen? They already are, he said. They just don't know it yet. From the row behind, a soft voice interrupted. Sir? It was Laura again. Her hands were clasped in front of her, not nervous now, just respectful. I hope I'm not bothering you. Not at all, Ellison said, closing his laptop. I wanted to ask something, she said, stepping in closer. If someone like me sees something wrong, but doesn't know how to speak up, what should I do? Ellison looked at her for a moment, really looked. She was young, sure, but the question wasn't. You start by deciding what kind of person you want to be when no one's watching, he said. That's the only place courage ever grows from. She nodded slowly. That makes sense. And next time, Marvine added gently, ask yourself who benefits from your silence. If it's not someone you respect, speak. Laura smiled, not wide, but with gratitude. Thank you, both of you. She stepped back. The cabin felt lighter. Ellison turned back to his screen, typed 3 more lines. He paused over the last one, then hit send. An email flashed out across the country, landing in the inboxes of the Oralis Executive Board. Subject, Cultural Redesign Initiative. Inside, a list of action points, starting with a leadership retreat, followed by restructuring of crew evaluation criteria. He didn't want headlines. He wanted roots. A few seats over, a young man who had been filming earlier approached the aisle, hesitant. Maybe in his early 20s, hoodie and sneakers, earbuds slung around his neck. Excuse me, sir, he said. I recorded some of what happened earlier. Not everything, but enough. I just thought, maybe people should see it. Ellison studied him for a second, then asked, Are you hoping to get likes or hoping to make people think? The young man blinked. I mean, both, I guess. Then make sure they're thinking about the right thing, Ellison said. Not the drama. The lesson I will, the young man said. Promise. He turned and walked back to his seat. The hum of the engines filled the quiet again. Marvine reached over and slid her hand into her husband's. You didn't yell. You didn't curse. You didn't even raise your voice, she whispered. I didn't need to, he said. I raised the standard. It was almost quiet again, at least on the surface. The hum of the engines had become background noise. A tray clinked somewhere in the galley. A few passengers flipped through magazines or sipped sodas. But everyone still had that look, the kind you wear when you've witnessed something and don't know what to do with it yet. Ellison had just closed his laptop when a soft chime sounded overhead. Then came the unexpected. A familiar voice, Candace's, returned over the intercom. Calm, rehearsed. This is Candace Holway, former lead attendant on this flight. With permission from the captain, I've requested to speak briefly to passengers before we land. I'll be entering the cabin shortly. Heads turned. Even Marvine sat up straighter. She's coming back? She asked, eyes narrowing. Ellison didn't reply. He wasn't surprised. Not really. Systems don't break clean. They resist. They push back. And sometimes they ask for redemption. A few moments later, Candace reappeared at the front. She wasn't wearing her uniform jacket. Her bun had loosened slightly. Her face was pale but composed. She walked slowly down the aisle, stopping when she reached Ellison and Marvine's row. "I asked to say something," she said, looking not just at them, but around the cabin. "And I was given the chance, so here I am." Ellison folded his hands calmly. "Go ahead." Candace cleared her throat. "I was wrong. That much is clear. I made an assumption based on nothing but a feeling, and I acted like it was fact. I embarrassed you. I questioned you publicly, and I disrespected the position I was trusted to carry." Her voice wavered. Not dramatic, but real. "I know I've likely lost my role here, and I understand why. But I wanted to say that it wasn't just about you. It was about a pattern in me that I never challenged. I thought following procedure made me right. But it didn't make me fair." For a moment, the plane was still. Even the attendants in the galley had stopped moving. Marvine spoke first. "We don't need to see you punished," she said gently. "We just want to stop seeing people like you act like we don't belong." Candace's eyes glassed over. "I don't know what to say except, I'm sorry, truly." Ellison looked up at her, not with anger, not with victory, but with something deeper, a kind of weariness edged with hope. "Then say less," he said, "and learn more. And if you get the chance again, don't just follow rules. Follow what's right." Candace nodded slowly. She stood there a moment longer, then turned and walked back up the aisle without another word. This time, no one stopped her. No one whispered. They just watched. After she disappeared through the curtain, Marvine exhaled. "Well," she said, "that's something I never expected." Ellison turned to her. "People surprise you sometimes. That's how change starts." From across the aisle, a young woman, early 30s, blonde hair and a loose ponytail, leaned forward. "Mr. Braxley," she said, her voice respectful, "thank you for how you handled all this. I know it wasn't your job." Ellison gave a soft shrug. "Wasn't my plan either. But sometimes the moment finds you, and you either let it pass or you answer it." A few seats down, the man with the gray sport coat spoke up too. "I travel a lot. I see things like this, but I've never seen someone hold power like that, with grace." Ellison looked around now, not just at the faces near him, but at the entire cabin. So many of them had started this flight thinking of him as just another passenger. But now, they saw a mirror, a line in the sand, a possibility. "It's not about being powerful," he said. "It's about using what you have when it matters. Sometimes that's your voice, sometimes it's your silence, and sometimes it's the space you hold that reminds people of who they're supposed to be." The cabin grew quiet again, not out of tension this time, but reflection. The pilot's voice came through the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be beginning our descent into New York shortly. Please ensure seat belts are fastened and tray tables are upright." Marvine leaned her head back against the seat and looked over at her husband. "You didn't just get someone fired," she said. "You got a whole plane to think." Ellison gave a small smile, eyes still forward. "That's all I ever wanted." The wheels touched down on the runway at JFK with a low, steady rumble. There was a small jolt, then a quiet chorus of exhaled breaths, relief, habit, closure. The landing was smooth, but what had happened in the air still lingered. Ellison looked out the window as the New York skyline peeked through the clouds in the distance. The city looked the same, but something in him had shifted. As the plane taxied, the seatbelt light pinged off, and passengers slowly stood to gather their belongings. No one rushed, no elbows or muttered complaints, just a quiet sort of respect that hadn't been there when they boarded. Ellison stayed seated. Across the aisle, the young man who had recorded the earlier events stepped forward. He held up his phone but didn't aim it. "I decided not to post the video," he said. "At least not the way I was going to." Ellison raised an eyebrow. "I thought about what you said, about sharing the lesson, not the drama. So I'm working on a caption that actually says something. Maybe something like, 'Sometimes power doesn't need a microphone, it just needs a moment.'" Ellison gave a small nod. "That's closer to the truth than most headlines." The young man smiled, tucked his phone away, and walked toward the exit. Marvine stood now, pulling her coat from the overhead bin. She moved with the calm of someone who'd reclaimed space, not demanded it. Ellison stood with her, and together they waited in the aisle. People made room for them, not out of pity, not out of guilt, out of something else, recognition, maybe even gratitude. As they stepped off the plane, Laura was waiting near the door. Her expression was steady, thoughtful. "Thank you," she said, "for giving people like me something to think about before we just follow." Marvine smiled at her. "Now you know that silence isn't always neutral." Ellison added, "And leadership doesn't always come with a title." They exited into the terminal, walking together with quiet purpose. Later that evening, a statement from Morales Air made national headlines. The press release included formal language, but the message was clear. Effective immediately, Morales Air is launching a comprehensive internal review. All service staff will undergo new training focused on unconscious bias, customer dignity, and inclusive service. We are committed to ensuring every passenger is treated with fairness and respect, regardless of how they look or where they sit. The message was signed by the Board of Strategic Leadership, with Ellison Braxley's name at the top. But Ellison didn't care about the headlines. He and Marvine were already checked into a quiet brownstone near Central Park, unwinding from the day. She sat by the window, a book in her lap, while he scrolled through messages on his tablet. Mostly notes from executives, allies, even strangers who had been on that flight. He paused on one message from Candace. It was short. "I don't expect forgiveness, but I'm grateful for the lesson. I'm applying for a training program in cultural engagement next week. If I ever work again in this field, I want to be better. I need to be." Ellison read it twice, then closed the tablet. "You okay?" Marvine asked. "I think so," he said. "I didn't want her destroyed. I just want her to see what she refused to see." Marvine looked at him a long moment, then said, "You know, you didn't just make a point today. You made space. For her. For that girl. Laura. For everyone watching." He leaned back in his chair. "I guess that's what I've been learning all along," he said. "Power isn't just about pushing back. Sometimes it's about creating room for the next person to stand." Marvine smiled. Outside the window, the street was calm. A taxi pulled away from the curb, its tail lights glowing in the dusk. Ellison stood, stretched, and walked over to her. "Let's go for a walk," he said. "Now?" she asked, grinning. "Yeah, you and me. No stairs, no rows. Just two people walking forward." She took his hand without hesitation, and together they stepped outside, into the quiet night, into a world that had changed, just a little. Because sometimes it only takes one flight, one voice, one moment, to shift everything. Sometimes the strongest voice in the room isn't the loudest. It's the one that speaks last with calm and conviction. Ellison didn't need to raise his voice to make a difference. He simply stood his ground, and in doing so reminded everyone on that flight what dignity really looks like. What about you? Have you ever seen quiet courage shift a room? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more powerful, real-life inspired stories like this one.